Thank you, Dr. Annamarie Francois, for taking the time to talk with me about your perspectives on and your predictions about teacher education. You've made significant contributions to the field, particularly in regard to urban schooling and diverse classrooms, and I am excited to hear your thoughts. So let's get started. What changes stand out to you since you began in teacher education?
Well, first, I want to say thank you, Allison, for inviting me to do this. The thing that I'm most proud of with our field is that we have really come to understand and take up the ability to be explicit and unapologetic about the role of teacher education in addressing racial, social, educational, and environmental justice. When I came into the profession, we really thought about teaching as more a technical act, right? So you have a bag of tricks on how you teach ELA, how you teach mathematics. We had these conversations about best practices. And there was an assumption that we were teaching teachers to teach anywhere and that there was a profile of student. And I think, living in a place like Los Angeles and thinking about the diversity of California, and now that diversity has increased across the country, um, we really have to think about teaching more as a political act. And rather than centering the curriculum, rather than centering the standards and the framework, we've really come a long way in centering the real life experiences of the young people that are in front of us. That teachers should not be centered in classrooms. I remember when I first came into teacher preparation, Megan Franke was, I believe she was the executive director of Center X. And we were in a faculty meeting, and she said, as a field supervisor, we were charged with looking at what's going on in the classroom, right? And giving feedback to our novice teachers. And she said, if you're looking more at what the teacher is doing and less at what the students are doing, you're looking at the wrong thing. And so that is kind of the culture that I came into teacher preparation with. But now I see that I was even looking at what I thought a very surface level student engagement. I didn't have enough knowledge of my students and their cultural dispositions and their life experiences to really interpret what I saw them doing. And so I think that our field has gone a long way in trying to move beyond those kind of dimensions of teaching that are very technical and get more into the social political dimensions of teaching. And so what that means for us is really helping our novice teachers to develop not just content knowledge, skills, and abilities, but also kind of a critical consciousness and dispositions towards justice and injustice in all of the manifestations of injustice, right? And so teacher preparation, I think, is responding to that and in embedding in their coursework an interrogation of candidate identity and positionality so our students come out understanding that there are some conscious and unconscious ways of being that affect your decision making that can harm children unintentionally. So let's deal with that in teacher preparation. Let's prepare you to have dispositions towards understanding that and confronting the biases and assumptions we hold in ourselves, but that our colleagues hold as well, so that we can really move the needle on closing some of these opportunity gaps that K-12 students are experiencing. And so I think teacher preparation is doing a much better job of valuing that kind of knowledge and having teacher candidates spend time coming to understand the young people, the families, and the communities in which they do their clinical practice and those communities that they hope to teach in. So I guess Allison, all of that is to say that I've been really encouraged that we've been moving beyond the technical aspects of teaching and really thinking more about the social, the relational, and the political dimensions of teaching. Well, one of the most exciting things for me is the work that really helps us to see how race, gender, class influence the educational system, influences school-wide commitments, and ultimately influences the classroom practices that our K-12 students experience. And so we, I think, as a field, have been very blessed that the precious progressive educators, right, of our time folks like Frary and Dewey and our own Jeannie Oakes at UCLA, Marilyn Cochran Smith, Ken Zeitner, they've gifted us with this beautiful progressive legacy that's kind of igniting the scholarship and practice of folks who are, for me, like the next generation of transformative education scholars and practitioners. And, you know, in the UC, you've got, you know, Thomas Phillip up at Berkeley doing amazing work. You got Rita Coley at UCR. You've got Margarita Jimenez Silva at UC Davis. And then we have all of our, Michael Pollack, right? And Tandika Chapman at UC San Diego. So the UC has this real rich emerging legacy of progressive teacher education scholars that are standing on the shoulders of the folks that I came into this field who were radicals, right? Like when I came in, the folks that I mentioned that are our precious elders, these were radical visionary people who folks were saying, you should not be, did you just say urban education? Did you just say we need to address cultural and linguistic diversity? And you want to put that front and center, right? It was unheard of at that time. And they created this road, right, for the more contemporary scholars that I just spoke of to take that mantle of the work and to apply it in contemporary settings. I'm really excited about that because, you know, that really is what's going to turn the needle, right, move the needle in where teacher education is going.
Yeah, I think it reminds me, I've done, you know, part of my teacher education at UCLA in the master's program, and it was always framed as teaching is political. And yes, there are technical aspects to it, but if you're not going to come to it grappling with your political identity, the political identities of the students and the families and the communities that you're serving, then you're going to miss the boat on them.
Yeah.
I think you started to allude to this, but I want to make sure if there's any other thoughts you might have about where is teacher education going?
So there is the optimist in me, and then there's the pessimist in me, right? So I'm just going to talk about teacher preparation and what happens inside of teacher preparation for a minute, because I think what the current moment and our history has told us is that teacher preparation has a lot of work to do in terms of looking inside of our programs and what we do inside of our program. I don't think that there's any teacher education program in California right now that isn't thinking about how to make their own curriculum more culturally relevant. I think that we do need to drill down a little deeper in cultural relevancy. I think that being culturally relevant is not being anti-racist. I don't think that being anti-racist is addressing anti-Black racism. And so I see teacher preparation continuing this good work of being more progressive and more critical to change the kinds of curriculum that we offer our students, to center scholarship of research and scholars of color. If you really look deeply at it, there aren't a whole lot of Black scholars that we look at. Tyrone, absolutely. Tyrone comes from our community. Pedro Noguera, absolutely. He comes from our community. Travis Bristol up at Berkeley, he's part of our UC community. But there is a field of Black scholarship that can help us to understand this challenge of diversifying and bringing in more Black and Black male educators into the field that we've not looked at. Bringing in a diverse perspective from scholars who have actually lived the same experiences that our K-12 students are living and have successfully navigated it, and then bring together the literature of the field, their own lived experiences, to create something that informs how we can better prepare teachers and meet their needs, diverse sets of teachers, and meet their needs and meet K-12 needs, I think is really important. I will be honest with you, and I will say that I think that by and large, teacher education has been marginalized by most universities. I don't know everything about curriculum and instruction, right? And so in this moment, when we're talking about, we're in the midst of this racial pandemic, one of the things that I am mindful of is that I need to be in partnership with other units on our campus to bring their voices into teacher preparation, because there's some things that they know that I don't know that's going to help our teacher education program. So for instance, our ethnic studies units at UCLA could really inform the curriculum, our teacher education curriculum, right? Because ethnic studies, it centers the voices of minoritized groups, the same groups that we are trying to recruit into the profession, and the same groups that we're trying to create better opportunities for. So why would I not bring our ethnic studies units and our teacher education, our ethnic studies faculty and our teacher education faculty together to redesign and rethink the teacher education curriculum, right? That would make it, that would deepen the curriculum. So when I think about where teacher education is going, I see teacher education going in the direction of bringing in the resources of the university outside of teacher preparation to help us to create a more robust, more responsive, more culturally diverse and inclusive curriculum than we have ever before. Our profession should move in the direction of being much more community minded and community, uh, being more community based in the way that we prepare teachers in intentional ways. I think it happens in different spots within our profession, but I'd like us to go deeper. I'd like that commitment to be much more intentional and be more a part of the kind of regular work we do as a profession, rather than, wow, this is a really interesting way to do it. No, this is the way that we do it.
My next question is thinking about what needs to happen in teacher education. And I think you've started to go down that path with the connection between teacher ed programs and communities. I don't know if you want to speak more about how those partnerships can develop more effectively, or if there are other things that also need to happen in teacher ed right now.
I do want to talk a little bit about kind of community-based teacher education and some divergent thinking about what that means. But I think before we can even go there, that what needs to happen is that teacher ed programs need to really clearly articulate who they are, what you want to do, and who you want to become, not in response to state mandates, not in response to federal mandates, but really in response to your deep-seated values about teaching and learning. And that everything that we do has to match up to those values. And those values, in my opinion, Allison, have to be right now around how are we going, what is our role in addressing injustice in the city, in the state, and across this country? You can't have a blind eye to this. I feel like teacher ed is coming to, Tyrone uses the word reckoning, right? That we're in this moment of reckoning. And that word really resonates with me because we are. And unless we all come together around what our role as teacher educators, teacher education programs are in helping to address injustice, we should not be part of this. Mm-hmm. Now, getting back to how you entered into this question, we can't do this as teacher education programs alone, right? Because we do this in communities. And so we must not only, those values that we hold have to consider the values of community members. Mm-hmm. I really love Tara Yasso's article on community cultural wealth, because it really helps us to think about assets in a very different way. And it requires us to suspend our privileged perspective of what young people should come into schools with that have value in educational spaces. And once we realize that, then it shifts the kinds of experiences that we have our teacher candidates undergo in teacher preparation. So I would hope that teacher education programs would mirror the kind of professional learning, collaboration that we expect of K-12 teachers. And I think that we need to do that, Allison, across sectors too. I also think that we need to start learning and rethinking and thinking boldly about this, what I'm going to call the ecology of professional learning. We need to collaborate more. And most importantly, I think that we just need to think boldly about a profession that is of critical importance. Um, uh,
My last question for you is, what do you wish you had known prior to or as you were learning to be a teacher educator?
my teacher education experience has always been in the midst of progressive educators, the top scholars in the field, right? And as someone who came from K-12 schools, I found that quite intimidating, quite intimidating. I remember I couldn't even speak to Megan Frankie or look at Jeannie Oakes for any long period of time without being like, and it wasn't a fangirl, it was a total intimidation factor, total intimidation factor. Um, and because of that, I did not understand the value of practitioner voice the way that I understand it now. That I had created in my consciousness a hierarchy of whose knowledge matters. And it was teacher education scholars, teacher education practitioners, K-12 practitioners. I don't believe that anymore.
Yeah.
And had I come into teacher education holding on and remembering who I was and why my voice was so important in K-12 schools as a practitioner and really held on to that, I think I would have been a better teacher educator. I just wish that I was more confident and bold in being able to say, my voice matters in this space. I wish I had known that earlier. I wish somebody had told me earlier, as I have told you.
Mm-hmm.
You are an emerging scholar of teacher education. But before you got on that pathway, you bring with you all the knowledge experiences that from your own schooling, from being an educator in K-12 schools, and it totally influences, and it's probably the reason why your scholarship is emerging in such a brilliant way. And I want all teacher education scholars to feel the same way. And once you rise to the level of your scholarship where folks are, quoting you and citing you, and you're the go-to person, I want you to remember that this is where your voice started.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an important part of who you are as a teacher educator. And I don't want you ever to forget that.
Yeah.
I won't forget it.
Right. Well, and I think that's, one of the reasons we keep coming back into each other's lives is that deep commitment to practice, and that a theory doesn't really mean very much to us if it doesn't have practical implications and benefits to the students that we seek to serve.
I think what needs to happen is that we always have to go back to what we believe the purpose of
Mm-hmm.
schooling is, and therefore what is the purpose of teacher education. And it all goes back to equity, democracy, um, and justice. And I just really strongly believe that everything that we say, everything that we do, whatever we spend our resources on, has to be measured against our vision for those things. And if it doesn't match up, we ought not be doing it. We have to have a bolder purpose, and we have to define what achievement looks like in a much broader, more diverse way, if we are going to prepare the next generation of young people to enact democracies in ways that my generation hasn't done yet, that the generation before us hasn't done yet. Um, it sounds corny, and again, it sounds cliche, but I believe that education has the power to transform the world. I totally 100% believe that. And teachers are the ones who are on the front lines of that. So that means teacher education has an awesome power. And we've got to take that, and it's not just power, it's responsibility. And we've got to take that really very seriously. Um, and I think we're moving in the right direction, but we've got a long way to go. All you got to do is look outside at the racial unrest to be reminded of that.
There's nothing else that reaches as far and as wide as public schooling. So we're better than to concentrate this effort on democracy, equality, justice. I think this is it seems to me as the most obvious place for these efforts to happen.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to add before I stop the recording?
I think it's really exciting that you all are getting the various perspectives. I don't think that people realize how the general public
Right.
really realize is who's teaching the teachers and how
I don't think people think about that at all. At all.
it so matters. Like,
Right.
your education matters so much. And if we don't get it right,
Yeah.
if we don't get it right, we are putting out generations of teachers who are going to reproduce the kind of inequitable conditions and in some instances oppressive and racist practices in classroom that not only put kids in the margins but also put them in danger.
Yeah.
And so, we are smart, creative educators. We can figure this out if we figure it out in collaboration with our community partners, if we always center students and we think about teaching much more politically than we have in the past. And hopefully I'm around to see it happen.
I think you will be.
If not, you will be around to see it happen.